Hello athletics enthusiasts, welcome to Tracks in the Sand, Oceania Athletics video series. We're exploring all things athletics, answering your questions, providing insights and tips and history into this great sport of ours. Once again, this week we are joined by two of Oceania's finest technical officials. This week we're talking about starts and all things starts. The starters, they're a tough group to break into and often seen as the glamour officiating role. Well, that's according to the start panel. And just to make my job a little bit more difficult, we've got two Dave Bs actually, David Brown and David Bryan. And we'll start off as usual. We're all wearing different officiating shirts. Mine this week is from the 2019 Pacific Games in Samoa. And Dave Brown, we'll start off with you. Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and the shirt you're wearing and go from there.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dave Brown. I'm in Queensland. I've been officiating for about 8 years now. I've done throws, jumps, somehow found my way into the starts, and yeah, you're right, it's become a bit of an attractive area to be a part of, and it's been really fulfilling, really satisfying. There's some great people that we've been able to work with. So the shirt that I'm wearing is the 2015 Pacific Games. That was probably has been so far one of the biggest highlights. It was really quite the experience to go to Port Moresby and to experience everything about the Pacific Games, and being, from staying through in the athletes' village with the athletes, right through to the 100-metre finals on the night with a packed stadium. Really quite an experience.
Dave Bryan, now to you. I noticed you're wearing a jumper underneath. It's a little bit cold. You're from New South Wales. A little bit cold down there?
Yes, it is, Tom. Colder today, but nice sunny weather. But with the sun goes, the temperature drops. This is at an Oceania Championship that I officiated in Fiji, the Oceania Championships a few years ago. A great time with some fantastic friends, and met a lot of new people there, and was able to help out with mentoring some of the new officials from the Pacific Island nations, which I found very rewarding. I've been officiating since about 2002, and have qualified in a number of areas, but my pet area is the start area, and I've been actively involved in that area at major levels since then. I've been lucky enough to officiate in the starts as a starter in the 2006 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne and the 2018 Commonwealth Games in the Gold Coast, and have enjoyed them all. It's been a fantastic journey, and I look forward to continuing.
Excellent, thanks, Dave. Let's get stuck into it. We'll start from the start. There's generally a lot of people and a lot of officials around the start area. Dave Brown, I'll go to you first. Maybe just explain some of the roles that the officials take up at the start area.
Okay, well, the main person who is responsible for starting each race is the starter. Basically, the buck stops with the starter. If anything does go wrong, whether the recallers pull it up, then the starter still has the final say of the race. There are the recallers as well. There's usually 2, sometimes 3, that are positioned at different places near the starter to get an alternative view. Sometimes on the occasion, if the starter doesn't see something and the recallers do, they can pull up the race. But again, once that happens, they report straight to the starter, and again, it's the starter's call to make the final decision on that. Then there are the starter's assistants. They have a range of very important tasks, and that is from ensuring that the athletes that have come to the start area are in their correct lanes, that they've still got the correct bibs, the hip numbers. They're also responsible for making sure that every starting athlete has their baton. And, of course, the starting blocks, to make sure that everything is there and in order, ready to go. There is the start area coordinator, who basically just does that. He coordinates. He's across the board and making sure that everyone is on top of their job, that everybody has an allocated job to do. And then at the end of the day, when all is well and ready, that they report up to the competition manager who, can tell them that they can start the race.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Dave Bryan, we'll go to you. This is probably the one that people are wanting to know. What constitutes a false start? And is there like difference between a false start, unfair start? But just what constitutes a false start?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's a really interesting question. There's a few ways we can look at it. I suppose about 99% of the races are started with the report of a gun or the sound of a gun or an e-gun, which has become the norm for most places today. But for large participation events such as marathons, so if you pick, say, the New York Marathon, our gun probably wouldn't be loud enough. So they may even use a cannon or something like that, which has just changed in the IAAF rules. And it's that sound of let's call it a gun, it's that sound of the gun that actually starts the official start of the race. And that gun also then triggers electronically the starting apparatus, so the timing, or a manual timing, a person's manually timing, it's the signal for them to start. In the cases of sprint events, it also activates the wind gauge, so that we're able to sort of verify whether it's a legal or an illegal head or tailwind. The race itself won't be started until the starter's going to call the athletes. Let's say it's a sprint event. He or she is going to call them up to their marks. He'll go through the procedures with the starter's assistance, making sure that their fingers are behind the line and that their feet are in contact with the pads of the blocks. When he or she has received that signal, they will then ask the athletes to come into their final set position. And when the starter is sure that those people are still and steady in that final set position and there's no movement, they'll pull the trigger to start the race. That's how the sprint events are going to be started. A little bit different for the distance events, where they just come to their marks, but again, they're expected to be still and steady, and I'll come onto that in a little while. Once the athletes have reached that position and they're all still and steady and they're released for the start, the starter then has to adjudicate as to when the athlete actually started the race. Now, the easiest one for the starter to adjudicate on is if they're in that final set position and before the starter actually pulls the trigger of the gun, the athlete tries to attempt to start the race. So they've gone before the gun. In that case, it's a fairly simple thing and the athlete will be disqualified because they've gone before the gun, and the athletes will then be brought back and reassembled for a restart. In an international event, it happens a little bit different, where the starting blocks are wide and with with an electronic system that detects whether the athlete has gone early, and that's if they go anywhere faster than 0.100 of a second, a sound will come over, and the starter will then stop the race. Unless there's something that's gone wrong with those things, that's an automatic false start. There's really not a lot of adjudication happens on that. But if the device is proved to be faulty, then obviously the athlete will be most likely given a second go. But for most of us, what we're looking for in the start, as far as a false start's concerned, is what's happening with the hands and or feet. So in a normal sprint event, the starter will be looking for if there has been a hand or two hands leave the ground prior to the gun sounding, or a foot or feet leaving the foot plates prior to the gun sounding. Now, if that happens, a recall gun will be sounded and the athletes will be returning back to their marks. While that's happening, the starter and the recallers will be discussing what each one of them has seen. And if they come to a consensus that an athlete has gone early, they'll be talking about disqualification of that athlete. At this point, another member of in the start area, not part of the start team, and Dave didn't touch upon this, is a person called the start referee. Now, that individual will then either agree or disagree with what the starting three have decided upon. If they agree with it, then the athlete will be disqualified, and the starter will verbalise that to the particular athlete about the disqualification. If they disagree with what the starter and the recallers have talked about, then there will be no false start, and a green card will be given to the field, and the athletes will be reassembled, and the race will be started again. The important thing to note about the start is that it's the consultation that's happening between all of those individuals. The rules changed a few years ago. The starter is no longer the sole arbitrator on whether the start is false start or not. It's the referee who makes that final decision. The other way in which an athlete may be considered a false start is what we call a rolling start. And it's where an athlete's trying to anticipate the gun, and they actually start to roll forward. Their hands or feet could still be on the blocks or on the ground, and they're moving forward prior to the gun sounding, so that they're trying to be pushing out the moment the gun sounds. Now, if the starter or the recallers assess the situation and believe that the athlete is trying to get an unfair advantage by this rolling start, then the athlete can be disqualified. And again, that would be verbalised between the people at the start area, and the referee would need to be in agreement with that. The other type of false start is a false start that could be given in a distance event, but it needs to be remembered that a false start in a distance event is very rare. We can have very large fields, and the false start rule was never introduced really to deal with these people in a harsh way. So what we're looking for there is that both feet are on the ground, in contact with the ground, behind the line, no hands are touching the ground, and that we have no one sort of going over the line prior to the gun. Now, if it's a stumble over the line prior to the gun being sounded, then the athletes will be brought back to their marks, reassembled, and then the race would be recommenced. It's very rare that an athlete would be disqualified in a distance event. The only thing I could say is that if you could see the athlete was deliberately pushing off and going with intent, then that would be something that would need to be talked about with the starter and the recallers at the start line. Now, the other issue that we wanted to talk about was the unfair start, I think, and the unfair start was something that would be hindering the athlete to perform to their best as a result of something happening at the start. Now, this could be something as simple as a foot plate has come out of the starting block, causing that particular athlete not to be able to start the race in the way in which they may have liked. It could be a really loud, sudden noise from the crowd. It could be the wind effect on the microphone through the e-gun system. It could be papers blowing directly in front of an athlete as the start's occurring. The starters are very vigilant and sort of acknowledging what's going on, and they'll stop that race, and they'll indicate that it's an unfair start, and then all athletes will be put back onto their marks, and the race will be started again. I hope that's answered the questions there, Tom.
For that, Dave. And Dave Brown, we'll go to you. One of the big shots the TV likes to do is really focusing on the officials with the coloured cards. And I know there's a different number of coloured cards that the start team use. Can you talk us through what the different colours mean, what the different cards mean?
Sure. So whenever a race is recalled or aborted, and the starter makes his call, it's important that it's done as quick as possible. And when he does make that call, then that's where the starter's assistants are armed with their cards. And what they need to do is they need to let the athletes, other officials, and of course the crowd know what's happened and what's going on. So there is the green card, needs to be held nice and high so everybody can see it. But the green card is for for no warning or no false start. And that might happen if, say, the blocks move, or if there was a sudden loud noise that may have distracted the start, or perhaps for an unsteady start. The red and black card is used when an athlete has been disqualified for a false start. The yellow and black card is only used for the first false start in a combined events race.
Can you...
Hope that helps.
Definitely, Dave. Just while you're on that, can you just quickly touch on that combined events, because I know they do have different false start rules to normal track events.
Yeah, with the combined events, they are allowed one false start, which is then a warning across the field, and the starter will say that when he makes his command. And if then that does happen again, then that athlete will be disqualified and dismissed from the race.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Dave Bryan, we'll go back to you. You did mention before about the course of action that an athlete can take, say if they have been disqualified. What are the courses of action that an athlete can take?
Okay, Tom. First of all, I just want to deal with the false start and the unfair start. Well, just gone through what constituted a false start. Now, an unfair start occurs sometimes, and Dave from Queensland hinted on it. It could be something as simple as there was a block slippage. And we see this from time to time, particularly in places where equipment's not quite like we'd like it to be, and or the athlete may not have put a block into the rail correctly, where the start's in process, the gun's gone, they've pushed back to come out of the blocks, and the blocks have slipped back. Now, we have recallers in position that are adjudicating specifically on that and looking for these sort of things occurring. And a second gun will be pulled on that event. And again, with quick consultation between the members of the immediate start team, that will be resolved, and the race will be called an unsteady start, or an unfair start, I should say, and then it will go through the whole procedure again. Now, sometimes too, the gun, you've got to remember, in the starter's eyes, everything's going through fine, and they've decided to pull the trigger, and as soon as they're pulling the trigger, other things can happen. So this could be something as simple as a noise just momentarily before they pull the trigger from outside, which could be misconstrued by athletes as the start signal. You've got to remember, these athletes are really, really tense when they're in this final set position, and their concentration is purely on any noise basically that they hear is enough to send some of them out of the blocks. So it's important that as starters, we're aware of these outside noises. And you may see a lot of starters, we only have, with the modern ear guns, we only have an earpiece in one side. The other side's open so that we're able to hear any outside noises which may distract the athletes at the start. And again, if that occurs, it's a simple matter of just saying it's an unfair start again, and we're going to reset the race, and away we go with the second edition of that event. Thanks, Tom. As an athlete, if I feel that maybe that I have heard a noise, or I feel like there's an unfair start, is there a course of action if the officials does come and disqualify me? Do I have a course of action to protest? Yes, Tom, you do. You've got to remember that the disqualification will come from the stand, will come from the starter. The starter is responsible for verbalising what the team has decided upon for that particular event. Let's say it's a disqualification. The athlete then can ask to talk to the referee, and this is the other person that's involved in the start area, and a very, very important person. Remember, before the actual decision to disqualify the athlete was verbalised to the athlete, the start team have already talked amongst themselves, and this is happening while the athletes are returning to the block area. The referee has also heard that same conversation. Now, if they're in doubt as to whether there was a false start, well, then they will not agree with what the start panel had talked about. And in such a case, the instruction will be to give a green card. That race has, there's been a technical problem on it and it will be restarted. However, if the referee is in agreement and the person has been disqualified from the stand, they have a right to talk to the referee. Remembering, we're trying to speed this up as much as possible. And the referee will ask them some simple questions. Why do you think you didn't false start, or what caused you to false start? And they may say something like, there was an outside noise. The referee will then consult with starters' assistants or umpires who are nearby to see whether they heard the same noise. And if that's the case, then the athlete, depending on whether the referee agrees or not, will be reinstated to the race, because all referees have the ability to alter their initial call. If the referee still thinks that it's a false start, or agrees that it's a false start, then he would inform the athlete of that. But he would also ask the athlete, is there any evidence that would support him not being, or her not being disqualified, and advise them that if such evidence was available, it should be presented to the start referee within 30 minutes of the start of that particular race. And if the evidence are not conclusive or not supporting the athlete will be disqualified. If it is supporting the athlete, then an individual time trial for that athlete will be scheduled at a later time. The athlete will run in the same lane under the same conditions as the others ran. And if the athlete achieves a qualifying time which is enough to advance them to the next round, they will be advanced to the next round. If they're not advanced to the next round, then they will just be credited with that time. I hope that answers the question, Tom.
It definitely does, Dave. And Dave Brown, I'll go to you with this question. If an athlete is feeling unsteady or not ready, or is what's the best course of action for an athlete to do when they're going up to the set position? Maybe my hands aren't in the right position. What's the best course of action to do?
Yeah, putting the hand up whilst you're in your blocks can arouse a fair bit of interest, and it better be a good excuse, otherwise you will get the red card. But if there are, obviously, like you said before, there are a lot of instances where the athletes are very tense, very nervous. Whether they're standing or they're in a crouched position, they can overbalance and fall out of their blocks, or they can step over the start line. That's a natural response. Sometimes we understand that, and so we can be quite understanding in pulling up the race and saying, okay, guys, let's just try that start again so it's fair for everybody, and we'll call it an unsteady start.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Thanks to both of you. I'm gonna leave this last question to both of you, and I'd like an answer from both of you. You both started some big races, and I'd like to know the biggest race that you guys have started. So I'll start in Queensland with Dave Brown.
Probably the most interesting, thrilling start would be the final of the 100-metre women's race at the Commonwealth Games. It was just really quite surreal to have a very quiet stadium. Everybody's focused on that start line, and you could just sense that everyone was just holding their breath. It was a fantastic, was a great race. It was just really good to be a part of that one.
Perfect, Dave.
Well, I had two. One was starting the 400-metre men's, I think it was, the last event at the Commonwealth Games in Melbourne in front of 96,000 people. That was a pretty daunting sort of an event. And I suppose I really remember one for me was starting Usain Bolt in the 150-metre sprint at the Melbourne event, the Nitro Athletics there a few years ago.
Perfect. So I know it is the start is an amazing thing, that there can be 96,000 people there turned to silence to watch the start of a race. It's an amazing thing that happens in athletics, and not many other sports get it. So we'll wrap it up there, and I thank you both very much for coming on. We really appreciate the insight and the knowledge that you guys have given everyone, and we do appreciate it. If you do have any questions or anything that you want answered, anything about athletics, please feel free to get in contact with us through our social media channels, and we'll get to them. We're getting to all parts of our sport, and next week we'll be focusing on the walks, and we'll have some officials and some of our walkers from around the Pacific joining us. And that's been Tracks in the Sand, episode 2. Thanks for joining us, and thanks Dave and Dave again for joining us.